Hey everybody! Today I am going to make a little art scene with this adorable stamp set called Talented Trio from Stampin' Up! And also the Project Life set called Happy Times. Here is Talented Trio. I just love this set. It's so much fun to color with those three little girls. And this is the Happy Times set. I'm just going to use this little frame as a picture frame with this little artist figure. I have a piece of watercolor paper that I'm arranging the little girl on, and I have this set up in my MISTI because since I'm stamping on watercolor paper, I'm probably going to need to stamp it a couple times to get a perfect impression. So I will just line her up. This is the first time I've used this image from this set, so it's still a little bit sticky. Now I'm using hot press watercolor paper here. Has a little smoother finish, but even with a smooth finish, ink will not perfectly adhere to it the first time usually. I'm using the new Archival Basic Black watercolor ink for this image. I love this new ink. I'm so happy we have a watercolor ink now. And I will stamp her down. Seriously, she is so cute. This little artist stamp makes me wish that I would remember to wear a little smock when I do art because I just ruin my clothes. So I'm not as smart as this little girl. Now, you can see where her shirt didn't stamp perfectly, and so that's why I'm going to use the MISTI to stamp it again and make sure that it is totally solid. I do want her to have a black shirt and black pants. Sometimes if you press and hold like I just did there, the ink will bond with the paper. It's just a matter of how long it has to sit on the paper, and that can help you get a smoother impression too. That works with any kind of cardstock that you're using. Just give it a minute to make friends with the paper. Now I'm using painter's tape to create a wall and floor for my little girl. Just lining it up on the grid paper. It's really the greatest use of grid paper. I mean, I just love having a grid to line things up because you know that's not my forte. Now, if you've ever taken an art class, a painting class, a watercolor class at a local art institute or museum, I take them in a museum here, you will notice one thing about the rooms that you take these classes in, and that is that they are really pretty not perfect. It's sort of like painting in a prison, actually. They're usually really dirty. They have super industrial furniture. No one's ever cleaned the sink in an art room. I mean, ever. I think they actually buy dirty sinks to install in art rooms. And so in the scene that I wanted to create today, and this is for Kitty's Dare to Get Dirty challenge, by the way. You should come play in Dare to Get Dirty. Join the fan club if you haven't already. But in this scene, I wanted to give the feeling that I always have when I'm in an art room. The backdrop is sort of gray, usually cinder block, like prison or like a dormitory, or at least the dormitory that I stayed in when I went to college. And I also wanted to portray that kind of fun messiness that comes with just creating a painting and learning and making mistakes, because that is what the artistic process is all about. So for the background, I'm using smoky slate, and I use just a light amount to do the wall. And then I'm going to use a little, oops, my tape wandered. I'm going to use a little darker application of the same ink to create the floor. And I have stamped her little feet on a Post-it note and masked those off just so that I don't cover up her skin because I'm going to be coloring that later. But if you compress the sponge just a little bit more, make it a little bit tighter, it will transfer the ink in a heavier way than I did above with just kind of a looser sponge. So that's one little tip if you're looking for darker shading. And I'm not looking for smooth coverage here again. I'm going for the messy art room. The art prison. So I just want to make a little bit of contrast to the wall that I created, which is probably about half the shade that I'm adding down on the bottom. So I'll remove that, and now I have a nice little wall. And I also have a nice little smudge up here. But don't worry, I'm going to show you an easy way to get rid of that. I never worry about that kind of stuff anymore. And it's funny that it happened to me on this card, which is all about art and being messy. So sometimes life imitates life. I'm just taking a sanding block. I get these on Amazon. I'll give you a link. They're extremely inexpensive. And especially with watercolor paper, it's such a tough paper. You can sand off that top layer. No one will ever know that there's any difference between that place where the ink spot was and the rest of the normal watercolor paper. It sands beautifully. And also that's a very fine grit sandpaper that's on those manicure blocks. So great tip if you get a big old fingerprint. So now I'm just going to watercolor my little girl. And there's really not much to color on her, so this is a fun image, even if you are a little bit intimidated by watercolor, which I hope you're not. I hope you love it. But if you are, this is a very easy image to color. The first thing I'm doing is I'm putting down a little bit of shadow with Night of Navy ink. And this isn't the ultimate color that I want for her smock. I want her to have kind of a denim look, but I wanted to pre-add a shadow with the darker ink and then go on top of it and add the color that I like, which is, you guessed it, Pacific Point. It's a beautiful blue. And I'm going to pretend that the light source in her messy art room is coming from the right-hand side. So I'll leave darker shadows on the left and just mix these two ink colors. Watercoloring with re-inkers is super fun. And most of these colors are designed to go together, so you can have that Garanimals effect that we all like when we're painting. And one of the cool things about watercolor paper, in addition to being able to be sanded, is depending on the watercolor medium that you're using, you can also fix mistakes in a way that's very similar to the way a colorless blender pen works with alcohol markers. So you know how you can lift and move color with that colorless blender. Well, you can also lift and move color just with water when you're watercoloring. Again, it depends on the medium. Some watercolors are more reactive than others. But right here, I'm just going to go, I'd gone outside the lines just a little bit. I'm going to go back with a little bit of water and just remove that mistake, and it's like it never happened. So experiment with different mediums and different watercolor papers and see how reactive some of those things are. And if you're like me and you make mistakes a lot, you'll probably enjoy working with the more reactive types of watercolor and paper, just so that you can clean up those little mistakes. Now I'm going to use two colors for her skin. I wanted to give her kind of a pinky undertone, and so I'm coloring her with Blushing Bride. And I'll speed this up just a little bit. You've already seen enough coloring. And then I will come back and give her shading and warmth to her skin tone with Crumb Cake, which you can barely see in the lid of my ink pad, but it's there. Gave myself a little re-inker to get it a little bit darker. She's going to have a pretty vibrant background, and so I didn't want to do too much shading and too much color on her face. Now it's time to color her little paintbrushes, and I'm going to do these in primaries. I already have a blue, so I'm going to make one of her brushes real red and the other one Daffodil Delight. And then I will paint the little pockets and the paintbrushes gray, again, just to match that backdrop. Now I will mask off her face and her smock and her arms. And even the little paintbrushes, I cut those out of a Post-it. You should be super impressed. I used to hate fussy cutting. Now I like it. I don't know why. And I'm going to take Melon, you know what I'm going to take because I do this all the time. Melon Mambo Reinker, Daffodil Delight Reinker, and Tempting Turquoise Reinkers. These are my favorite primaries. And I'm putting them on one of my disposable washcloths that I'm going to use as an ink pad. And I like the way these three colors blend if you move the stamp around a little bit. And this stamp is from Gorgeous Grunge. And it's the perfect art splatter background for this scene, for my messy art room. And after I stamp that a couple times, I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow. I noticed I wasn't really over that section of my fake ink pad. And so I'm going to grab just a little bit of that and add a few splashes of yellow here and there. And I love the way this looks. This is so cute. This is just really like she's in an art class. And then when I remove the mask, you can see she's standing there in front of her messy art wall. And I decided that I wanted to give her a little shadow underneath her feet. She sort of looks like she's floating there in space. And you never want that. Well, I mean, maybe you do. It'd be fun, a little hovering artist. But I wanted her on the ground today. So I'll just do two little shadows for her legs with crumb cake. I wanted a little bit warmer look because I wanted it to be like the warmer colors off the wall were reflecting onto the floor. So that's why I didn't do it on gray. And under her shoes, the shadow is a little bit more pronounced. This is why it takes me forever to do a project, because I just keep finding things that I want to do to it. I mean, this one isn't that long, 10-15 minutes, but there's a lot of hemming and hawing that goes into a project like this. And I want y'all to know that when I sit down to do these, I do not pre-design these projects. I do them live on video. And the ones that I don't end up liking, you just don't see. So I'm doing all of my thinking and planning right in front of you. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. Now I'm taking the frame from Happy Times and placing it where I want it on the wall behind her. I just want to have a little gold frame with a scene in it. And I'm going to ink this up with Versamark ink because I'm going to be using gold embossing powder for the frame. And I'm not really sure why I'm doing this in the Misty. I could have just done this with a block, so you can do it either way. I won't be over stamping this since I'm embossing it, so I don't really need that double stamping precision of the Misty. It's just, I'm in that habit now. I can't do anything else. So I'll add a little bit of gold embossing powder. My gold embossing powder has returned from Salt Lake City, where it went for my retreat. Very happy to have it home. And just thump off the extra. Sometimes I do the embossing buddy, sometimes I don't. You probably shouldn't be like me. You should probably use the embossing buddy every time so you don't get little strays. But I'm actually planning on covering up the center of this frame with a little scene. So it's going to be like she painted a little painting and it's hanging on this messy wall. So I don't need to worry too much about the little stray pieces of embossing powder, because if they're in the center of the frame, you're not going to end up seeing them at all anyway. So I'm bringing back my Misty for the sentiment before I do my little extra frame. And this is from one of my favorite stamp sets. And it says, life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. And I thought that was so appropriate for my messy art scene. Now, since this is a cling stamp, I'm taking the foam out of my Misty. And once again, I'm going to use that archival black ink. And I'm just checking it on the grid paper just to make sure it's straight. This one has a nice straight top on that top word. And so it is actually easy to tell when it's lined up straight. And I like that. The curvier ones are harder to get straight because I don't see straight, and then there's nothing, no physical thing for me to line up on a grid paper. But this one is great. I am going to overstamp this because it's a little lighter since it's on watercolor paper. And it looks much crisper and nicer. Look how cute that is. And then I just painted her a little scene with reinkers with Mossy Meadow and Pool Party and stuck it inside the frame. And there she is, her imperfectly wonderful little scene. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching.